All right. Good morning. Great to see everyone. Lots to cover within a short amount of time. So, as always, we'll speak as fast as we can, and you can listen to 0.05 speed if you want later on. However, today's is really all about, well, let's start like this. They tell a story of an individual who goes to this conference, this managers conference. He's a new big CEO, and he goes to one of these, I don't know, like, how to assert yourself and be the best leader that's in there, and make sure you get efficiency out of your staff and your people. Comes back from the conference, and he walks in, and he wants to like assert himself. He's the brand new CEO. He wants to show that he's the boss. And he sees people are at their cubicles, and there's one person just sitting there leaning against the wall doing absolutely nothing, looking at his phone. And he walks up to the guy and he just, this is unacceptable. Everybody's got to be producing, got to be working. And he goes up to him and he says, he says, tell me, how much do you make an hour? So he says, I make 15 bucks an hour. So he goes into his wallet, he pulls out $5,000, gives it to him and says, you're fired. Don't come back. The guy takes the $5,000, looks at him, says, thank you so much. And he walks out, and everybody's like stunned. The guy turns around to the entire staff and says, listen, he says, in this place, we're productive. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do. I don't even know who you are. It doesn't matter, but you work. By the way, can somebody tell me anyhow, who was that guy? What did he even do? And some guy in the back raises his hand and says, that was the pizza delivery guy from Domino's. Right. So the question is laughter. What makes something worthy of laughter? What's inherently funny about a pizza delivery guy getting $5,000 from a CEO that wants to act like he's the boss? And if we hold that for a second to try to understand laughter, one of the things we've studied before when it comes to our learning is that if we want to understand a principle in the world, we look at the first time that it's referred to or created in the Torah, right? Because in order to use a word, the word has to have a context. If you don't know what the word means and you're trying to describe it to somebody, that word has to be the prototype of the epitome of the description of that word for you to understand it, right? So if I use the word like, Finurgan right now, you'd be like, what's Finurgan? I'd have to explain a context or use it in a context that teaches you what that is. So it's really interesting that when we think about the concept of laughter, the first time laughter is introduced into our lexicon biblically has to do with the birth of, in this week's Parsha, Yitzchak, right? It's crazy if you take a step back for a second and think, wow, our forefather, right? Abraham is called the father of all nations. Yaakov is called both the heel and Yisrael, the one who overcomes. Yitzchak, his name means laughter. And one can't just say, oh, that's cute. Within our understanding, there has to be a reason why Yitzchak is called laughter, why the essence of Yitzchak is laughter, and that'll help us both understand laughter on our own level of when and why we laugh, but more importantly, what is laughter in Jewish thought, and why do we say words like "Az yimale schok pinu"? In the end, we will have a mouth full of laughter, right? Vatischak liyom acharon, and Eshes Chayil, we're going to say in a few hours, right? And she laughs at the day of death. At the final day, there'll be laughter. What exactly does laughter mean? So let's piece it back a little bit, understand what happened with the whole setup of Yitzchak, why it's not just, oh, this is therefore why he's called Yitzchak, but why he had to be the essence of Yitzchak. And hopefully, I think that'll actually give us tremendous strength as well for the time period that we're going through over this extended period. See, in the joke that we told beforehand, and maybe my delivery isn't always awesome, but what makes something funny is very often when you see a reality, you think something, you expect something to happen, and then all of a sudden it takes a sharp turn to the exact opposite, right? Humor, if you think about it, when does a person chuckle, right? I was tempted to, but I'm not going to. I was tempted to turn off my screen, and I literally have, I'm just not going to do it. I have like a wig here. I was going to say, hold on 1 second, I got to go do something. I was going to turn it back on and be like, hey, here I am. You'd be like, why? Because the last thing you'd expect is for me to have like one of those, like, blonde, curly, braided wigs on when we're speaking, right? Now, if my kid walked in, and they had that, you would smile also. It'd be funny. We weren't expecting the kid to walk in, but kids walk around with that. The more extreme the change is from where you think it's going to go to a totally different reality is where the greatest laugh happens. Right, I'll give you another example. If we think about jokes, right? There's a person who's sitting there and he's going through a lobotomy. He needs a new brain, and he goes to the doctor, and he says, "Listen, I need a new brain before this. When I go through this process, do you have any available?" He says, "I've got two actually." He says, "Great," and he looks at them and he sees the price tag. One of them is like $1.5 million for the brain. The other one is about $40. So he's like, listen, I'm kind of tight on cash. I'm just curious, like, why the big discrepancy? Well, he says the $1.5 million brain, that's a guy's brain. The $40 brain, that's a woman's brain. He says, but you racist, sexist? He says, no, 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 you don't understand, right? The men's brain hasn't been used yet. The woman's brain is really well used, so I can't charge you a new price. So if you think about that joke for a second, at some point, somebody's sitting there and saying, okay, this misogynistic rabbi is about to tell a joke that throws women under the bus, right? And there's this anger that's surfacing if you didn't know it was going somewhere. And then all of a sudden it changes the exact opposite. And what we thought was the reality is the exact opposite reality. And laughter comes when we think one thing is the sure bet, and yet the exact opposite happens. With that in mind, and our body naturally reacts with laughter. The response, it's not that we laugh when there is a funny joke. The reaction to something that is the essence of funny, of something turning out very different. A person's walking down the street, slips on a banana peel. That's not funny. The person hurt himself. Why do we laugh? We're not expecting this person with his briefcase and his suit to all of a sudden fly up in the air. It might be painful for the person experiencing it, but the person outside realizes this is not what I expected. So now let's go to our case with Yitzchak, and more importantly, as well applied eventually to the Jewish people. If you think about the birth of Yitzchak, if you think first about Sarah and Avram are on a mission to transform the world in a totally radical way of ethical monotheism. Everybody is against them. They mock them. They laugh at them because they think what they're doing is impossible. Not only that, they're now in their older years. They're 70, 80, still no children. God says, don't worry, you will transform the world. And all of a sudden, they're visited by these angels. They pull them aside and say, hey, by the way, listen, get ready. I know, Sarah, you're 90. Avram, you're 100. I know there's no Viagra. We got no other, there's no whole system over there, but you're going to have a child next year. What do they start doing? They start laughing, right? Why do they start laughing? They think it's an impossibility, right? Our deeper sages say that not only did Sarah wasn't able to conceive, she didn't even have a womb to conceive if she wanted to. It was literally impossible for them to have a child. And yet what happens afterwards is the impossible becomes possible. Right? The great laughter that takes place is when everyone's looking around thinking this is the end of the Jewish people, or it's the end of the promise of their journey, or it's the end of them being able to go ahead and actually continue. You think it's the end of the Jewish people? Somehow, when it's least expected, almost impossible, the impossible happens. And why is it that Avram and Sarah's child has to be that? The one who is the one who projects and generates this entire idea of continuity of this have to happen with their first child? Because what the Torah is telling us is the history of the Jewish people is going to be exactly that. And we see throughout history this entire arch always taking place of the impossibility of it happening. The Jews are in Egypt, the 49th level of Tumah. We're almost destroyed, and out of the total darkness and despair, all of a sudden the messianic era comes. Right? If we look in our own personal time period, after 2,000 years of exile, when you think it's the end of the Jewish people, right? The greatest laughter and joy that happens is from that somehow created the impossible of the greatest comeback and return that ever took place. And that's why when you look at Yitzchak's name, Yitzchak isn't just tzachak, it's Yitzchak, will laugh. Az yimale tzchok pinu. Right? We have a phrase in English which I think is so deeply rooted in this concept. We say, he who laughs last laughs the hardest. What does that mean? It doesn't mean they get the last laugh. It means all of life is about this process of giving birth to something impossible. And the harder it becomes, the more a person realizes that what's actually happening is it's setting up for the greatest of all laughters, the greatest of all changes. And everything in Jewish life is about realizing what we think is a given is actually the exact opposite. We reference that line of Az yimale tzchok pinu, of when the ultimate redemption time period comes, is what does that mean? Then our mouths will be full of laughter. It says in this period, we can't have complete laughter. There's too much pain. There is laughter, right? And we have to understand why, even in times of pain, there is. But we understand that it's so difficult that our mouths cannot be fully in pain, in laughter. It's only after the entire story is over, right? When everything is, and that's why actually they say why it's Eshet Chai. Why is it the woman who has this idea of Vatislach Li'amacharon? Because women naturally, physically understand the concept of giving birth to something, right? Which during the process, again, I'm speaking as an outsider. I've only witnessed it 8 times. I haven't experienced it myself 8 times. But during the process, it's not a process of enjoyment. But the ultimate laughter comes that through that process, you know, at the end is going to be the greatest of all joys, not despite the challenge that a person went through, but the nature of ultimate joy is the effort and the work that's expressed to get there. And at the moment where a person thinks they can't go on anymore, that's the moment where the greatest birth happens and the greatest of all enjoyment and laughter takes place as well. And I think that's, if we look at the story of Jewish history and then place that into both our personal lives, when we've seen those ebbs and flows in our own lives, but more importantly, or equally as important, with our national, our history of life, the idea of the ultimate joy that takes place, Az Yimale Schopinu Yitzchak, means that the story that Avram and Sarah started so long ago, which seemed like the impossibility of the continuation of a vision that at every step of the way seemed like it was almost over, he who laughs last laughs the hardest means along the way we might get laughed at or seem like, what are you, crazy? You guys are the minority. There's no way you can continue. Look at what's happening around you, and the world is laughing at us. But we realize that this process is not about the real laughter. The real laughter is what happens at the end of the game when we look back and see what's produced. And if you take this principle, the truth is, and you apply it to every area of life, we think the greatest pain, right, gets turned around in an instant and becomes the greatest joy. Without going into depth, I'll give 2 or 3 other examples with the 1 minute we have left. That's the concept of body and soul, right? A person, there's obviously tremendous pain within one's passing, but the soul, it says, has tremendous joy. Well, how could that be? Because from the body's perspective, they realize this is the end. From the soul's perspective, they realize this is actually the beginning. Right? There's a story that's told. It's actually in one of the books behind me in Gesher Chaim. He talks about 2 children. It's called, there was a song made up about it called Conversations in the Womb, about 2 kids inside the womb, 2 fetus inside the womb. And one of them says, oh, I think I'm about to, I'm about to get out of this world. And they think, oh, he's going to die. What's going to happen to him? He doesn't realize that, wait, like all of a sudden, it's a great song. The song basically plays it out in a way that he says, oh, one of the brothers leaves. And he says, my brother must have died. And he hears the noise on the outside world and all this stuff. He says, don't worry, don't be as sad. That those are sounds of laughter and joy. Congratulations, it's a boy, right? What he thinks is the end. The greatest joy is being born into something totally different, the exact opposite existence. And so too throughout life. Our joy comes when we expect something to take place and we realize it is the exact opposite. And that is the story of the Jewish people. The reason why it had to be Yitzchak is God was telling the Jewish people through Avram and Sarah, the nature of the Jewish people will be that they will laugh. And laughter means that everything that they think is impossible to have happen, a 90 and 100-year-old couple who seems like that they're end at the twilight of their years, and Yitzchak who seems he's about to be sacrificed and they're going to get rid of him, it's actually the beginning of the birth of the greatest unfolding story of the Jewish people. And when the ultimate end of it comes, Az Yimale Schopinu, there will be only laughter as we look back. And very often we're in that position. When we look back and we see things that have happened that might have been difficult, but where it led to, there's this joy in realizing that that which we thought was breaking us apart was actually us falling into the exact place that we need to be. And therefore, Yitzchak, the first time you see laughter, is actually the definition of what Jewish continuity is and what our people rely on to understand that the impossible is exactly where the Jewish people begin. And that is why the laughter that will happen is when we look back at the story of the Jewish people, every step of the way we'll be like, that's impossible, impossible, impossible. And at the end of the day, we know where the whole story ends. And at that point, when we hopefully witness seeing that soon in our time, we won't just laugh a little bit. We will laugh last, we will laugh hardest, and we will laugh forever. So, Chevra, just a little bit in terms of, there's so much more on this. Laughing is no laughing matter. There's so much seriousness in terms of what it's all about. But we understand the Jewish people's essence is one that ultimately understands that the most laughable thing that will ever exist in the world is the story of the Jewish people who are able to navigate and overcome every single obstacle, even to the point where it seems we're finished. The greatest joy will seem that we cannot be stopped by anything, and that is not only the birth of Yitzchak, it is the prophecy of Yitzchak as well, which we continue to to learn. All right, Chaim, I think I went a minute over. I apologize. Hold on, got to stop the recording, but most importantly, have to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. How do I stop this? Oh, there we go.